you just made my day and hers, so thank you so much. So one of the most famous speeches that's ever been given by an athlete, maybe even anyone, was given by a quiet, a very soft-spoken first baseman for the New York Yankees by the name of Lou Gehrig. He stood at a microphone in the middle of the field there on a day honoring him at the end of a fabulous career that was cut short by a horrible disease that would take his life in a matter of months. A disease that later would be known for his name. He took the time on that day to thank all of the people that had made his career possible. All of the people that were behind the stages, behind the scenes that didn't get a lot of applause, the ticket takers, the people selling the popcorn and the peanuts, the field crew, all of those people that never got the applause but yet made his job possible. And then he said those words that echo still to this day, and you can almost hear them if you've ever seen the speech, said with an echo, "Today, today, today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth." I suppose that part of the reason that these words move us is because they speak of gratitude, deep gratitude in the heart of one that we would think had every reason on earth to be bitter. Here's a man, his body already falling apart from a disease that would cripple him and eventually kill him. And so we can hardly imagine the character that was required to express that much gratitude in that moment. Friends, there's a lot of things that I don't know, but one thing I do know is that the lucky ones, the happy ones, the ones that are most content and fulfilled in life are those that lead with gratitude. I admit that sometimes maintaining an attitude of gratitude can be a bit of a stretch. It can be hard. So many bad, horrible things happen in this world. People get cancer. Children bring guns to school and shoot other students. There are horrible things that happen in this world, and sometimes it is incredibly hard to be grateful because awful stuff happens. But so does beautiful stuff. It's all part of the big picture. And so, as a result of that, the real question becomes, how do we practice gratitude in a world that often feels ungrateful? Dr. Robert Holden, a British psychologist, an author, a broadcaster, once said this. He said, "The miracle of gratitude is that it shifts your perception. It shifts your perception to such an extent that it changes the world in which we see." Gratitude changes the world, or at least the way in which we see it. Several years ago, Gene Walbridge gave me a little book called Gratitude by Oliver Sacks. Dr. Sacks was dying of cancer when he wrote this book, and essentially it's a collection of 4 essays that he wrote in the last few months of his life. And in it, he said this: "My prominent feeling at this point in my life is one of gratitude." Remember, he's dying. "My predominant feeling is one of gratitude. I've loved and I've been loved. I've given much and have been given something in return. And above all, I have been alive on this beautiful planet. And that in and of itself has been an enormous privilege and adventure." You see, I would argue that gratitude does 2 things. Above all else, it does 2 things. One, it gives us the ability to experience life as a gift. And the second thing is that it liberates us. It frees us from the prison of self-preoccupation, of kidding ourselves that somehow we are owed all of the blessings in life. In the story that we heard just a moment ago, Jesus is passing through this remote area, and he encounters these 10 men with leprosy. Now, as I mentioned, in those moments, people with leprosy would hover between life and death. They weren't dead, but they couldn't really live. And even worse, they're forced to stand at a distance and simply watch everyone as they lived their lives. Now, according to the law at that time, anyone with any type of skin disease after being quarantined would have to get up and to go to a local priest and to be given the all clear. And as I mentioned, Jesus doesn't do anything. He doesn't cure them. He just simply greets them with mercy, tells them to go. And the implication is that by the time that they arrive, that they will be made clean. It's almost as if the mercy in and of itself is healing. Now, what I want you to notice in part is their willingness to go before anything's changed. This is an expression of extraordinary faith. As they went, they are made clean. You know, a phrase that we toss out from time to time as Christians, we talk about walking by faith. I would point to these 10 lepers as an example of that. They were walking by faith. That is what that looks like in action. But then there's a twist. One of them has this moment of an epiphany and turns around and he goes back. As much as he was ready to get back to living, he knew that he had to express his gratitude. Jesus had just given him his life back, but before he could move forward, he needed to go back to say thanks. And then there is that part. It's one of my favorite parts of the story that must have made Luke smile as he wrote these words. 4 words in Greek, 5 words in English. And he was a Samaritan. Almost as if, by the way. The implication there, of course, is that the other 9 weren't. Now remember that Samaritans at that time, they were despised by the Jews. A good Samaritan, as we often say, that was an oxymoron at the time, sort of like jumbo shrimp or plastic silverware. Those things don't go together, but yet all too often we force them together. Yet it is the Samaritan of all people that returns to Jesus, thanking and praising him. But Jesus noticed that he's alone now and asked about the other 9 and says to the Samaritan, well, then get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well. Your faith has made you well. Now, the original Greek says something slightly different. It literally says, saved you. Your faith has saved you, not made you well. That would have been enough. But the original Greek says, saved you. Your faith has saved you. The implication here, what the commentators point out, is that all 10 were healed, but only the Samaritan was saved. And what was it that set the Samaritan apart? It was his gratitude. You know, when I look around the world today and I look at our culture, what leads oftentimes to a sense of distance and isolation that so many people feel is this deeply ingrained sense, this feeling of entitlement, the notion that somehow I'm entitled to things, that I don't owe anybody any type of grace or gratitude, and I don't have any responsibility to care for anyone else. Now, how many of you, when I say that, can think of someone almost immediately? Someone who fits that description to a T, someone who feels entitled, who feels privileged, that feels like they don't owe anything to anyone. How many of us can picture a face? But how many of us immediately think of ourselves, see that same illness, that same disease within ourselves? You see, I wonder if sometimes having too much can make a person ungrateful. The illusion of gratitude, isn't it, that we'll experience it once we get everything that we want. But the reality is, as any parent knows, is that making sure the child gets everything he or she wants is the surest way to dull that child's sense of gratitude. Sort of like what Barry Switzer, the former Cowboys coach once said, "These are the type of people that are born on third base and think they got there by hitting a triple." So what is it that separates privilege from entitlement? Brene Brown says that the thing that separates those two, privilege and entitlement, is a sense of gratitude. A sense of gratitude. There is this interesting thing that happens in Scripture, and in the Psalms, Psalm 106, it talks about the faithlessness of Israel. And the psalmist suggests that God sees the way in which the Israelites are ungrateful for all of the things that God has done for them and in their lives. They're ungrateful, and so therefore God punishes them. But what's the punishment? According to Psalm 106, God gave them exactly what they had asked for. But along with it, they got an empty heart. Another translation puts it this way: God gave them what they asked, but sent a wasting disease among them. What's the punishment? What's the punishment? What's the disease? It's an empty heart, an inability to express and to feel gratitude. Sometimes we don't realize just how much we have to be grateful for until it's all threatened. Fred Craddock tells the story of a missionary who served in China for a number of years, but after the revolution, the authorities, the soldiers came and placed him and his family on house arrest. You're not allowed to do all of the things that you've been doing, and they placed him under house arrest. A few weeks later, they came back and told them that they would be allowed to return home to the United States. And as you can imagine, they were so relieved, they were so excited, and they were celebrating. But then the soldier says, "But here's the thing, you can only take 200 pounds of stuff with you." Well, they'd been there for years. And this family of four, a husband, a wife, 2 children, they'd been living there and gathering stuff for years. 200 pounds. They had way more stuff than that. And so they got out the scales and they started negotiating and arguing amongst themselves. Well, we have to have this vase. This vase means so much to us. Well, what about this? This is a brand new typewriter. We've got to take this. We can't leave this behind. What about my books? What about my toys? All of a sudden, the negotiations began and lasted throughout the night. They would weigh everything, negotiate back and forth until right on the dot, they got everything. 200 pounds, almost to the ounce. Well, the next day, the soldiers came. They said, "Are you ready to go?" They said, "Yes, we're ready. We're so excited to go home." They said, "Did you weigh everything?" "Yes, we weighed everything, 200 pounds. And the soldiers looked and said, "Did you weigh the children?" "I'm sorry, what? Did we weigh the children?" "No, we didn't weigh the children." "Weigh the children. 200 pounds is all you can take." In an instant, in a moment, the typewriter, the vase, all of it, it became trash. It became trash because none of it meant anything compared to the surpassing value of their children. Did you weigh the children? 2 weeks ago, there was a young family in our church, Ryan and Carolyn Hyman. They have 2 beautiful children, Stella and Keegan, and they lost their house and everything in it to a fire. It was that snow day that we had a couple of Fridays ago, and they were all sitting around doing their own thing when there was a pounding at the door. The neighbor had seen the flames coming out of the garage and so yelled to them to get out. And so fortunately, thanks be to God, they were able to get all of the family, all of the pets out safely, but pretty much everything else was lost. I went by to see them that afternoon, and I arrived just as the fire trucks were leaving. And Ryan and I stood out on the curb looking at what was once their home and now is just a burned out hull. And I said to him, "I'm so thankful that you can get out, that you got out safely." And he said, "You know, the rest of it, it's just stuff. It's just stuff. It's just stuff," he said, repeating it over and over. "It's just stuff." I spoke with Ryan this week, and all he could talk about was how grateful he is. How grateful they are as a family, for the way that this community has surrounded them, that has overwhelmed them with generosity. He said to me, sometimes it takes the worst things to bring out the best. That we are just so incredibly grateful to be so blessed, to be so loved. Here's a family that lost everything except the things that really matter. They lost everything but gained perhaps the most important thing, and that is the gift of a new perspective. Look, I don't know why life works the way it is. Why some people recover and some people die. Why some prayers get answered and some seem to go unheeded. I don't know. But I do know that life is a gift. I do know that life is a gift. It's not something that we earn, that we create, that we control, that we sustain. Life is a gift. And oftentimes in the ordinary moments of life, we rarely ask the question, what's truly important? But every once in a while, we are blessed with a moment of clarity about what is truly important in our lives. And it oftentimes comes to us in a moment of chaos, maybe trauma. Sometimes it's an accident, sometimes it's an illness, sometimes it's a fire. But in those moments, we measure what truly matters. And we remember what makes life worth living. Weren't there 10 of you that were healed? Where are the other 9? Jesus asked.